Welcome back to Over the Edge podcast. It has been one entire year to the day since Over the Edge podcast launched its first episode, Fail Big Baby, which is still, by the way, our most popular episode. I highly recommend going back and listening to it. It's been a good one, right? And that's my personal philosophy in any creative work that you do. Like, you should be pushing yourself to failure at some point. And I don't mean physical failure or mental failure. You should be pushing yourself past your boundaries of comfort so that you end up failing at something so you can learn to get better. If all you're ever doing is winning and booking and everything feels easy all of the time, great. And maybe that's just like what you needed in that season of your life. But if you really want to be in a space where you're constantly expanding and going bigger and trying new things and getting on bigger stages or getting your work seen by more people, there should be an inherent risk there. And that inherent risk is always a little bit of failure. And it's not a bad thing. I think it's a marker of success to fail, because you can come back, you can do it again, you can try again. There's nothing that's going to stop you from that. So Fail Big Baby, episode 1, it was a great way to start this podcast. And here we are 12 months later. And today I'm going to talk to you about everything that I feel like I've learned after a year of podcasting. I'm really proud of what we've done. And, I got to tell you, after week 8, I got really nervous about what am I going to keep talking about on this podcast, right? I had in my mind a list of topics I wanted to talk about to start off with. And part of the challenges I was facing on other platforms in terms of content for social media or a newsletter is I liked it, but I wanted a place where I could have the time and space to go deeper into the thoughts and the topics that I was bringing up. And it's hard to get into all of that in a 500-word blog, but at the same time, people don't necessarily want to read a really long newsletter. They might not be stopping their scroll for your caption anymore. And so I wanted a place where people would purposefully come for more of the content. And so that's what I feel like we did. And then after 8 or so weeks, I was like, oh my gosh, am I running out of topics? How am I going to do this? And I started to get nervous, but somehow we never ran out of topics. There's so many, if you get creative about creativity, there are an endless number of things to talk about. And I've had some really amazing guest stars on that I feel so fortunate to have talked to. It blows my mind when I look at my list of guest stars from this past year, and I can't wait for my guest stars for this next year coming up. So all that to say, it's been such a joy and such a joyride to do this podcast. And when I started, okay, so here's what I wanted when I started this podcast is I told myself a year. I'm going to spend a year podcasting every single week, and I'm not going to pay attention to numbers or downloads or engagement or listeners or subscribers or anything like that. I just want to do it to do it. I just want to do it because I enjoy doing it and because it's fun. And that has served me well. That's a tactic I've employed for almost everything that I've ever done or created in the world. It's the same for photography. When I switched from weddings to commercial work, I told myself, I'm going to give myself a year. I'm going to show up every single day. I'm going to give it my all, whether or not anyone's paying attention. And after a year, I'll know if commercial photography is something that's viable for me. You can't pay attention to things that in that first year, you can't pay attention to things that you think are telling you not to do it. It's just, they could just be baby steps and learning experiences, right? You don't want to get fooled by that into giving up. So that's my usual tactic, is 1 year of complete dedication, and then we'll reevaluate. So it was the same with this podcast, 1 year of complete dedication every week, showing up here with a new episode, and then we'll evaluate. Did this work? Did it not work? Should I keep going? So I'm going to tell you today what I've learned this past year and what I want to do in the future. Okay. So I want you to learn from me. This is about these things that I've learned. These 5 things that I've learned is about podcasting, but they're not just about podcasting. So this is for you, creative, for any project that you're starting. But especially if you want to start a podcast, I've got some advice for you, but this is for everybody. Okay. Number 1, start yesterday. Don't wait 3 more months to start your podcast, because let me tell you, it's hard to get a podcast off the ground, and it's just going to get more. It's just an arena that's going to get more and more crowded. And it takes a certain amount of energy, yes, to get it going. But if you're like me and you just wanted to say, I just want to get it going, I'll worry about the details later. As long as I can get an episode up and out every single week, I'm happy. And in order to facilitate that, I created my intro, I created my outro, but my biggest hack, this isn't really a hack, but my biggest facilitator was no editing. I don't want to spend any time editing this podcast. I want to record it. I want to pop the intro on. I want to pop the outro on, and then I want to upload it. And that's what I've done every week, right? Even with guests, is we record, and if there's something that a guest comes back and says, you know what, I actually really wish I hadn't have talked about that or mentioned that or whatever, then yes, I can go back and edit that out. That's no problem. People don't usually do that. But it's fine with me if it happens. But other than that, there's no editing here. Like what you hear me speak into this microphone, and it probably is pretty obvious because there's a lot of ums, there's a lot of uhs. Sometimes I lose my train of thought a little bit if I'm not looking at my notes. It's fine. And it's fine. Like that got the podcast out there for a year solid. So if you're still sitting there going, but I got to get it just right, I'm going to have to edit it, and your podcast isn't out yet, when are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? So if you're sitting there and this is for any project that you're thinking it has to be this way, it has to be that way. What if you just did it to see how it goes? What if you just did it imperfectly to see how it goes? And then learn from whatever did or didn't work or did work. And when it comes to podcasting, this is a crowded arena, and it is hard to get eyes and clicks into whatever you're doing. And I'm not mad at that. I'm glad that I stuck to it for a year, because just now, after a year, I feel like I'm in a place where I can go bigger with it. I can use it as leverage. I can ask, dream guests on. Not that I haven't already had dream guests, I totally have. Right. But now I'm finally in a place where I feel like I'm on solid ground with my podcast, and it took a full year to get there. So if you want to start your podcast, start yesterday. Start it without feeling like you have to do it perfectly. Get it out into the world. Get feedback on it, right? Once it's out there, then people are going to tell you what works and what doesn't, and you can just adjust your sales as you go. You do not have to do this perfectly from the start for it to count for anything, right? It counts just because you're doing it. And it's hard to get into that mindset. It was hard for me to really accept that me just doing it counts. Not me doing it perfectly, but me just doing it counts. That's kind of hard to get into if you come from this weird perfectionist mindset. I call perfectionism weird, but it's not, is it? It's so typical for all of us. So number one, start yesterday. Number two, create a system for production. And this again goes back to all creative projects, right? So if I have a new client coming in for a photo shoot, we have a system that we go through, boom, boom, boom. I know what email I'm sending out. I know what resource guides I'm sending out. I know what team members I'm referring. I know what studios I'm looking at, even before we, ahead of time, I kind of get a sense of what a brand is going to want, even before we start our production meetings. I already have a system for everything I do in my business, and it's the same with this podcast. And I make that system as doable as possible, right? We talk about how I didn't want to be editing a whole bunch, right? I have my intro today is the same that it was a year ago. I have not touched that, and I don't really want to, right? Because it takes time to, get it all together, get your intro, get your outro, not a ton of time. And once you do it, it's done. But I have a system. I sit here recording this podcast with my mic I do it sometimes in Zoom, sometimes I do it in GarageBand, sometimes I do it in a Podcastle, which I've been liking a lot lately. And again, I take that file. Once it's done, I plug in the intro, I plug in the outro, I upload it. I have a template for the notes of the show. And I have it also, it's templated for how I take notes from guests and put those into the notes of the show with their links. Everything like that. I upload it and I just get it out. The system works. Same for, this is actually number three. Okay, so number two is create a system for production. And once you're in the flow of it, everything gets so much easier. Which leads me to number three, create a system for guests, right? So if we're looking at this from a creative lens, number two, create a system for production for yourself internally. Number three, create a system for guests. And so if you're starting a podcast, you'll want a system for guests. But if you were just a creative at large, you will want a system for working with other people. Okay. So you'll have your internal systems, that's two, your external systems. That's 3. So 1, start yesterday, 2, internal systems, 3, external systems. So I also have a very specific system for guests that is easy to set up. I have a template email welcoming people to the show as a guest star. There's a link where they can schedule. There's information on what they can expect. And there is a form for them to fill out ahead of the podcast. And that gives me very pertinent information on what they want to talk about in the show, what their expertise is. Once we do that, I have a system after the interview for, again, getting it all put together and getting it the final version ready. And then I have a system for letting them know that they get graphics, they get show clips, and they get a broadcast date, and they get links to share everything, right? So I have a system for that too. So your systems, internal and external, are something that's going to make your whole creative life much, much easier. And they've made this podcast so doable. And I'm really happy to feel like if you're going to ask guests at any point to be on your show, or if you're going to invite clients into your process, they're going to want to feel supported from step 1, right? What I never want is anybody coming into the podcast process or my photo and video process and going like, what now? I just said yes. And what are we doing? Right? I want you to know what's happening at every turn. So I don't take a rest on those processes, right? And it's the same for for having guests on the podcast. I want you to know what we're doing from the start, when we're going to do it, what you can expect, when you're going to get it. And I feel like those systems align pretty well with what a guest would expect, right? And so that's always what I want. Okay, number 4, if you can batch. Batching has become my best friend. And it took me a while to get there. For a while, I was just recording weekly, which is not a bad thing. Like, I sit down here and maybe I have my outline for the show. I like to speak just off the cuff. I don't need everything scripted. I like some bullet points so I don't lose my train of thought. But ultimately, I make a small outline for a show if I'm doing it solo. And I try to plan those shows out now. At first, I was doing it once a week, and again, not too hard, like sitting down and recording for 30 minutes and then popping intro, outro on, getting it uploaded. That would maybe take me an hour at most a week. And that's so doable, especially once I have all my graphics in place and all of my, links that I know, my standard links that I'm going to share. But also with guests, like I will enjoy recording like 2 or 3 guests at a time. That makes me really happy. And then I can get everything set at a time, get everything graphics at a time. So having the batching, I think, has been really valuable if you're concerned that a podcast or any major creative project is going to take a lot of time on your schedule. That batching has been so powerful and so useful. So highly recommend it. Number 5, Instagram is not the end all be all when it comes to marketing. And I think we all know that by now, after a couple of years of kind of giving it the side eye and going, what are you doing, man? Like, what is going on here, Instagram? What's your deal? And Instagram's like, nothing's my deal. I don't have to do anything. Good luck to you all, right? They don't care. So the reason I'm saying Instagram isn't the end all be all of marketing is that if you are going to make a podcast or any project, I want you to think about going beyond the world of Instagram. And I have been making a big push for this in the last few years. I have like a robust YouTube that's starting I'm finally starting to figure out how to do YouTube. Of course, I do love to have a newsletter, but there are all of these different other places that you can go that aren't just Instagram. And I know a lot of creatives like to stay on Instagram because it's such a visual medium that supports so many, like photo and video, so many types of different visual mediums, but stretch it out, stretch past the boundaries of what we're used to. I think that doing a podcast is a really good opportunity to really stretch yourself when it comes to new platforms. YouTube being one of them. I'm having fun on YouTube. I read something a while ago that said, like, you really don't know what you're doing on YouTube until you've posted 100 videos. And I think that's so true. I've posted like 70 videos and I'm only now figuring out what I'm doing. It's a hard platform to it can be a hard platform to get started on, but it's no more difficult than Instagram. All of it's kind of hard. So think about having a podcast as an opportunity to really expand your marketing beyond what you're used to. Because I think that's I think that's the age that we're all in right now, right? We have really said goodbye to the old ways of social media. For a while, social media was great for attracting, nurturing, converting, and that's just not happening anymore. So, I mean, it is happening to a point, but take number 5, use a podcast as an opportunity to really expand what you're doing in marketing and, put a few more eggs in a few more baskets. So, to summarize, what I have really learned after a year of podcasting, and you can apply this to your creative projects too, but start yesterday. Stop waiting on it. It's not going to get any easier. And it's going to take you a while to build the runway for whatever you want to do. So let yourself build that runway slowly but surely. Give yourself the time and space. Don't put a ton of pressure on yourself. Let yourself get there, right? But you got to start yesterday. Because if you wait until you're like, oh, this is it, I'm finally ready. Heck yeah, let's get this project off the ground. Let's finally get this started. And then you're going to see everything that, like, the amount of time it's going to take for you to really take flight in that field. You're going to go, gosh darn it, I wish I had started yesterday. Start yesterday. Number 2, create solid systems internally. Number 3, create solid systems externally so that you have good client experiences and guest star experiences. Number 4, batch everything, be as efficient as possible, especially if you're just starting and you're not sure where things are going to go. Don't let it be a huge drag on your time. Be as efficient as possible. Do that batching. And number 5, let this be a moment to put more eggs in more baskets, expand past Instagram and maybe even past email marketing, get into YouTube, get into new platforms, test the waters, see how it goes. You might find that you like it way more than you expected, because I know I did. Thank you all. The last thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you all so much for spending time here with me every single week. It is such a treat. It is such a highlight. It makes me so happy. It gives me so much joy that people are downloading and listening. When I check numbers, I'm like, wow, who knew? Who knew that people cared enough to hit that download button and listen to me just talking to a microphone for 20 minutes a week? I'm so grateful. I can't even begin to tell you how grateful I am. I can't wait to see what comes next for the next 12 months. What I'd like to do now that I feel good about caring about numbers after a year of not caring about numbers, now is the time where I start to care about numbers, because I feel like I have a baseline. What I want to do over the next 12 months is double everything, double listeners, double downloads, double subscribers, double guest stars, double my own appearances on podcasts, right? I want to go bigger with it. And so this is where it gets exciting. It took me a year to build enough of this platform. Oh, there's that noise in the background. It took me a year to build up to this platform to a point where I feel like I can really go and market with it. So that's why we're back at start yesterday. If you want a podcast platform that you feel like you can market with, you're going to need to spend some time building it up to start right now. So what you can expect over the next year is me going bigger than I've ever really tried before in a way that makes me deeply uncomfortable. And I think that's the way it should be. Like, you should be feeling a little bit uncomfortable in your creativity and in your work. That's how you go bigger. Thank you again. Thank you guys for being here. I will see you next week.